Hi, I'm Carrie Lee Merritt, and welcome to another episode of Merrittocracy. I'm here today with Angela Mayfield, who I've long been friends with on Twitter, and I'm just getting the pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for being here today.
It's such a pleasure, Carrie Lee. Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it already.
So Angela is running for Georgia State House of Representatives in District 67, and she's one of our new group of fearless leaders that are mainly young women, right?
It's amazing how that happened. It's like they kicked a hornet's nest, and all of a sudden these powerful young women just said, not today, not my rights, and here we all came. So yes.
And so for the people at home that may not know what that hornet's nest was that really made you throw your hat in the ring, could you explain a little bit about Georgia's anti-abortion law?
I'd be happy to. House Bill 481 was a law that was passed. I hate saying that. It was called the Heartbeat Bill because it prevented abortions past the point where a heartbeat could be detected, which is generally between 6 and 8 weeks. So what the bill effectively did was criminalize any abortion after one might know that they were pregnant, and also in some cases criminalize even miscarriages, the way the law was written. And it happened at the same time and in the same legislative session when they protected Confederate monuments. And so
Yet again.
yes,
Because they were already protected before that.
yes, and so in my state, in my Georgia, which I love dearly as I know you do, Confederate monuments have more bodily autonomy than women in Georgia. And that was the final moment for me that said, no, I can't do this, it's time to run.
Well, if anything else, I'm at least grateful that it has brought out a whole generation of people that should already be in politics, and I think it's really going to reinvigorate the party. I always say on this show that the South is a bastion of leftist progressivism ready to rise up at some point, if just given the option. Of course, there are forces that always keep it tamped down and who really control everything behind the scenes, but we're here. As you say from your district, you're not exactly from Atlanta. You're a little bit out in the more rural area. If you give people at home a little bit of an idea of your day-to-day life and the people that you live around in your district.
So District 67, I will proudly say to anybody in Georgia, is the best district in Georgia. It's most of Douglas County and also South Paulding County. It's not quite to Alabama, but I can see it if I stand on my roof. I have one little perfect half acre of West Georgia red clay dirt that belongs to me, and I love it dearly. My district is full of working people, people who've been there, gosh, in some cases I know people who've been there 5, 6, 7 generations, and there are other people who just moved, who just showed up. It's a little bit adjacent to the airport, so there's a lot of skilled labor. There's West Georgia Technical College is the second largest technical college in the state, and it's within the service area. It's a great place to live, and I've lived a lot of other places. I've lived a lot of other places in the country, and I have said many, many times, like, you won't move me from here. They will throw red Georgia dirt on my bones when I die right here in West Georgia, and I love it.
So, as you said, you've been around the world, and not just the U.S., but the world.
I have.
You were telling me a little bit before about your time in Africa.
I did. I worked in sub-Saharan Africa. I worked in Uganda for a while with a faith-based mission. We worked with, I want to say 24, but maybe a little bit more, children's homes and orphanages and children's schools in Uganda. And I think people will be familiar with it when you talk about the last king of Scotland. Because of the war in Uganda, there's a kind of a missing generation of people. And at the time, it was kind of like there were elders in their 60s and 70s, and there were children. And there was a missing generation of people in their 20s and 30s to kind of bring up children. And so therefore there were a lot of children's homes and a lot of orphanage services. I worked with a private nonprofit, faith-based, that worked very closely with USAID. And in doing so, I gained so much respect for our federal system of international aid. It's surprisingly well run and surprisingly well-intentioned. I think there's room for improvement in every regard, but the people in Washington who run USAID do so with the absolute purest hearts, and I love them dearly for it. It was a great time and a great experience. So, yeah.
Well, having grown up in between Florida and Georgia, right? And we're talking about Central Florida, kind of rural Florida.
Yes.
I know you went to Boston for
did.
college, but how did you then end up going to Africa?
So there's this thing we do as Southerners, and you might be familiar with it, where we do this thing where we've internalized the idea that being Southern, either through our accents or through our actions or our education, is somehow inferior. And so because of that, I internalized the idea that the North must be better. So it must, like, if being Southern is bad, then being Northern must be good. And so I went as far north as I could from Central Florida. I went to Boston, further north than New York, just as far north as I could get, and still speak English. My dad liked to say that I shook the dirt off my feet and caught the first thing smoking north. And I would always say, Dad, I didn't take a train, I flew. And I did. I flew on a one-way ticket, and I had never seen snow. I moved to Boston in January of 1999. And did not have enough money for a return ticket. And that was my insurance for staying there, because I couldn't come home. I got frostbite that first winter because I didn't, again, having not seen snow, no context for being that cold. I didn't understand you can't go to class with your hair wet or it will freeze to the tops of your ears.
Right.
So I got frostbite that first semester, and it was a big culture shock. Got rid of my accent on purpose.
And what was there a certain event, or is it just a general reaction that you said, I'm not used to seeing this and feeling the way I feel when people?
So I thought that everybody else had an accent. I thought that these Massachusetts North Shore fishing families, these I went to a women's college, so these girls from these North Shore fishing families, that they had accents. And come to find out, when you are in the minority, wherever you are, you're the one who is the aberration. And so no, it was me with the accent. I would open my mouth, and I don't have a strong accent even now.
Not at all.
Even now, when I'm not scared to have one, I would open my mouth and everybody thought I was a diner waitress. Didn't matter what my SATs were. Everybody assumed that I was stupid and that my parents were cousins. They weren't. Like, I mean, I am an Appalachian mongrel, but mom's family and dad's family did not know each other. And even now, I'm offended at that assumption.
I always say it's actually the Southerners who were very intermarried, marrying their own cousins, were the highest of the high elite. They were the one percenters. They were the slaveholders who controlled everything. Those were the people intermarrying within the same few families.
For the same reasons that the Habsburgs did in old European, Regency families,
Dynasties.
exactly for the
Consolidate
same
the
reason,
wealth.
to keep the wealth and the power consolidated. And so there's some of that in my mom's distant family, certainly none in mine. I kind of took offense at it, and as opposed to defending my Southernness, I, again, sort of internalized, well, they must be right. And so I practiced my non-regional dialect. I watched WCVB Channel 5 in Boston every afternoon, and I would say everything that the presenters would say in a non-regional dialect, and I practiced it to get rid of it. And I realize now what a disservice I did to myself. My experience might have been very different if people had sort of clocked me as the Southerner that I was when I opened my mouth. There's a writer, Greg Bottoms, who wrote a short story book called Sentimental Heartbroken Rednecks. And that's one of those lines that, man, I'd give anything to have written that, because it just sort of encapsulates everything about, there's a tenderness in our sort of Southernness, there's a sweetness in it, and also a bit of a roughness, in the redneckery. And so I was definitely a sentimental, heartbroken redneck. And but yeah, I moved to Boston. I was there for almost 10 years, and swore up and down I would never move back south. No. I'll never do it. I'll never go back south. There's nothing down there for me. And sure enough, I was wrong. And I came back south in the early 2000s and landed here in Georgia, where I had spent all of my summers as a child growing up, and never dismissed it now, but I never considered it a place where I would put roots. I never thought of it as a place that would nurture me, and how very wrong I was. Atlanta and the surrounding areas, I think it's such a fitting symbol of the city, the phoenix rising from the ashes, the resurgence, the renewal of the city after Sherman burned it down, because this is a wonderful place to hit Control Alt Delete on your whole life and start anew and start afresh. This is a great place to burn it all down and start all over.
I say that all the time.
It's a great place.
I mean, anywhere in the rural Deep South, if you've got ideas of doing something different, if you've got to break out of your community, if you go to your state's your big flagship school and then think you want more, where do you end up? It's Atlanta. If you don't make it to New York or California, it's Atlanta.
It really is, yeah.
It brings so much talent, and I think that's something that the people running this state now don't really think about it being a beacon, a brain drain, if you will, for all the surrounding areas. I mean, we're getting the talent here, and that's something that we need to keep going.
I don't think they recognize what a jewel they're sitting on. And not just in terms of economic value, which of course it is, and educational value. We have some of the best colleges and universities here in the Atlanta regional area. I just think that they overlook it for culture and enrichment. This is a, man, you know, when friends come to visit, when I have guests, I'm sure you get guests from out of town, right? Like, of course. And I love telling people every time I have guests come, this is not a great place to visit because everything's kind of spread out. You got to take 285 wherever you go. But this is a wonderful place to live. So it's kind of the opposite. Like, Chicago's fun to visit, wouldn't want to live there. But Atlanta is and the regional area, Atlanta is exactly the opposite. It's not necessarily, it doesn't shine on a short visit. But when you invest a little bit of time in this place, I wouldn't live anywhere else.
You have to have somebody that lives here take you around.
Yes.
Basically, know the good places to go, the good restaurants to take you to, and I'm so happy to have you here because I mean, you have so many internet fans. I actually was at the Decatur Book Fest and I had people showing up saying, "Pink Rocktopus sitting here."
Oh no!
So you're already a big Twitter star, and I think that obviously that's going to be
That was an
really
accident.
that's going to be the next frontier in having to run
think so.
campaigns, right? And
I
so
think so.
you're already heads and tails above the person that you are running against in a social media type sense. How are you going to continue to use that, or have you thought that through?
So the whole Twitter star thing was an accident. It was entirely an accident. Before all of this happened, so I wrote a thread March 30th, and I only know that because it was 3 days after I turned 40 years old. So I wrote a thread on March 30th about House Bill 481 and its impact on me as a married, childless woman in my 40s, and how it impacts other Georgian women that I know, and women who have less resources and less social. Is power the word for it? Yeah.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Than I do, and how it impacts those women and their lives. And it kind of blew up. And before that, on March 27th, I was just, a regular old internet user who liked to shitpost about octopuses and grow hybrid tea roses and talk about dogs. And that was it. And suddenly something happened, and I said some words on the internet that struck a chord. And in that, I kind of threatened a little bit to run. My House District Representative at the time, who still is my House District Representative of 67, was a co-sponsor of House Bill 481. The last 2 election cycles he's run unopposed, and in his first term, when he was first elected, he didn't have much opposition at all. There was somebody else on the ballot, but she didn't campaign at all. So he's basically just been sort of a shoo-in. And even as a voter in that district, I deserve better representation. He didn't return my calls when I called his office about 481. He's sort of avoided any sense of accountability to the people that he represents. And I, having had some experience in politics, said, y'all are gonna mess around and I'm gonna run for office. And the next thing I knew, I had a message from somebody high up in party leadership for the Democratic Party who said, were you just making words or were you really considering it?
She called your bluff.
She did. She called my bluff. And I realized that this is, there's not gonna be a better time than this. There's not going to be a more important issue. There is no waiting to shoot your shot until there's a better chance. This is it. Human lives, women's lives are at stake. This bill will kill women. And they've clearly shown what's important to them. Again, Confederate monuments in my state have more bodily autonomy than women. And it's not going to get any better without intervention. And at that point, I decided, like, you know what? I have a lot more privilege than most. I have less to lose. I have a good support system. I'm in a good place to run to represent those who cannot, who don't have the resources that I have. And I was asked to do so, and I did. And I said, fine, yes, I will do this for my state because I love Georgia that much.